Welcome to Funny Fuscata. I'm Shawn. Do you realize that a lot of the things that you think are true probably aren't? Or at least there's a sense of them, there's an aspect of them that isn't true. There's an idea that I got from Brett Weinstein. And if you're not familiar with him, he hosts the Dark Horse podcast. He's one of these folks in the intellectual dark web, along with his brother Eric and Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and some of these folks who are the intellectual dark web. Anyway, he sometimes talks about how things can be factually false, but metaphorically true. And that's a very, very important concept to wrap your head around, especially when you're dealing with religions and spirituality and the New Age movement and a lot of the things that you hear in the manifestation community. Which brings me around to the name of this project, which is Finding Fuscata. I got the name Fuscata because it's just a Latin word that means darkened, but it's very specifically the name of a certain kind of monkey. And maybe you've heard the story of the 100th monkey principle. Now, for a long time, I was an adherent to the 100th monkey principle. I believed it wholeheartedly. I thought that this was just the God's honest truth of how the world worked. Now, if you're not familiar with the 100th monkey principle, the story goes like this, that there were some biologists and filmographers, some people were trying to make some films of these monkeys. They're macaque monkeys that lived on the islands around Japan. And in order to film them, they wanted to get them out onto the beaches because they were hard to film when they were in the forest. So to do that, they enticed them with sweet potatoes to get them out onto the beach so they could film them more easily. Well, when they put the sweet potatoes on the sand, they were sandy, and the monkeys didn't like to eat them. Because who wants to eat a sandy potato? Well, as the story has it, a young female monkey, I think her name was Imo, I-M-O, she washed one of the potatoes, and then pretty soon, she taught her siblings how to wash the sweet potatoes, and then, the idea kind of spread around the other monkeys on the island, and as legend has it, suddenly other monkeys on other islands who didn't have any interaction with those first group of monkeys suddenly started washing the potatoes. And the idea was that once this behavior was adopted by a certain number of these monkeys, then the idea just spread like wildfire among all the monkeys of that species in that area. And those monkeys are called Macaca fuscata. And it's just because they're a macaque, which is like a darkened, it's just kind of darkened a little bit. But it's a cool word, and it means darkened. And the irony is that that story is not true. That's not what happened. There are factual elements of it. The person who was running the study said that yes, indeed, they were filming the monkeys, and yes, indeed, there were sweet potatoes, and yes, indeed, some of them were washing them, and absolutely. But there was never any observable moment when the idea started to spread, and this was never scientifically reproduced. And in fact, this idea became so popular, particularly in the 60s and 70s, when people were concerned about nuclear proliferation, they were concerned about nuclear power plants. And people would use this story of the 100th monkey to talk about how if we just have enough people stand against nuclear weapons, then it'll just spread across the whole population and everybody will be against nuclear weapons, or everybody will be against nuclear power plants. So it just kind of became part of the culture. But it wasn't true. In fact, the only studies that I've been able to find that even closely resembled the results of this were rat studies where they wanted to see if when certain behaviors were passed down from generation to generation, or maybe if a certain amount of rats would learn a certain behavior, if there would suddenly become a tipping point and it would just spread rapidly. And they never found that that happened. What they found instead was that as more rats started to learn a behavior, the rate at which a population of rats started to learn the behavior increased. So it was kind of it was a hockey stick curve. Like some of them learning, and then it goes up and up and up. And the more rats learned it, the more easily other rats seemed to learn it. And great. Now that study that I found was done by, I believe it was done by Rupert Sheldrake, who is trying to prove things about something he calls the morphic resonance fields, which is difficult to explain in a few sentences, but essentially his idea of morphic resonance fields is that we live in a world where there are certain things in the intangible world, in the quantum field, you might say, that want to happen. And this is similar to the idea of epigenetics, where if you take stem cells and you put them in a liver environment, then they'll develop into liver cells. If you put them in a bone environment, they develop into bone cells. I mean, this is something that we know about, that how it works. Rupert Sheldrake's theory is that there's something called the morphic resonance field, which is something in the unreal, sort of in the quantum field or something like that. He can't quite describe it, but it's something that's there that creates that desire, or not desire, but that tendency for something like a stem cell to develop into whatever it develops into. And has a lot of interesting experience and a lot of books, and it's an interesting field to study. But this idea hasn't been fully proven. But at the same time, it's kind of something that we as humans understand to be true. Like, if you remember back when Donald Trump was first running for president, and by the way, I wish him speedy healing, because the incident with the shooting was just yesterday, and also the people in the crowd who were injured. My heart goes out to the families of the folks who died, and I wish speedy recovery to the folks who were wounded. And I also, anyway, I don't want to go down that tangent, but when Donald Trump was first running for president, a lot of people were just like, this is stupid, this is nuts, he's just doing this for attention, he's promoting his show, or whatever the thing is. And nobody took him seriously until he started to gain a critical mass of followers. And then all of a sudden, he became, I wouldn't say the darling of the Republican Party, but the de facto leader of the Republican Party. Just because he just kept going. And some people would say that this would be an example of the 100th monkey principle, or as Rupert Sheldrake would call it, according to his studies, the 1000th rat principle. But the fact is that there's no scientific evidence that these principles work. There's no, there's no reproducible study or experiment that shows, like, this is how this works, and this is how many, and this is what you do, and it's just not a thing. But going back to Brett Weinstein's idea, is that this is something that is, in my view, my argument is that this is something that is factually false, but metaphorically true. It's something that we just know happens. You can kind of feel it. You see it happen around you. You see it happen in families and in offices and in universities, and you see it everywhere. But there's no good way to scientifically study it, and there's no way that anybody's found to be able to reproduce these results, but we just kind of know that it's true. And in similar ways, you could look at my view of Christianity, for example. That's my background. Is that Christianity is a religion that's based on stories that are not factually true. They're factually false, but they're metaphorically true. So, for example, in my view, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Those are tremendous stories that can tell us things about ourselves and how we can die to ourselves. We can, like, our old version of ourselves can die away, and then a new version of us can come forward. It's also metaphorically true in how the seasons change and the sun dips down and it appears like it's going to be gone, but then it rises again, and there's a new year that comes. There's a new birth that comes. There's a lot of different ways that you can look at all the different aspects of that story and see that they are metaphorically true. But they're often factually false. And so, the reason I call finding Fuscata is because those monkeys, going back to Japan, their species is called Macaca fuscata, which is just subjectively fun to say. I mean, say it right now. Say, Macaca fuscata. It's kind of cool. But what I'm seeking to do, though, is to find those things that are, maybe they're factually false. Maybe they're factually true. I don't know. But they're certainly metaphorically true. And there are also things that are factually true, but then metaphorically false. And don't ask me to give an example of that right now, but in my journey, maybe the most important thing that I've learned as I left Christianity, as I left organized religion, as I came away from the military and the indoctrination of the Air Force, I started to be able to see things that I had been told that fit in that same category. And that's the purpose of this channel. That's the purpose of this endeavor, is to find those things and to talk about them and figure out how they work, because there's so many things out there that we know that they're true in some kind of way, but we can't really prove it. We can't really demonstrate it. Like when we talk about vibrations and frequencies and law of attraction, and we talk about the Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount and the importance of being able to forgive and turning the other cheek, and like what all this stuff is just, it's out there, and it's important for us to understand, to be able to implement these teachings into our lives. But if we confuse that which is factually false and that which is metaphorically true, if we just take this whole thing and say, well, it's factually false, so I'm going to throw it out, well, we tend to throw the metaphor with it, and that's not good, because the metaphor was what was important. The metaphor was the thing the whole time. And too often these days, especially since we've become such a materialistic world, and we live thinking that matter is what matters, and we forget that what matters is ideology and the intangibles and love and community and caring and those things that used to make us, well, to bring up Donald Trump, those are the things that made America great. And I know a lot of people think, well, America was never really great. And maybe not, I don't know. And was it great for some people and not so great for others? 100%. And that's 100% still the case. But there's something in Donald Trump's statement, in that slogan of "Make America Great Again," whatever slogan he's using this time around, I don't know. Because there's something in America There's something in this idea of having a free people, of having freedom of speech, of having freedom of religion, of having the right to bear arms, of having these rights that were written down in our Constitution and the Bill of Rights that are important. And are there problems with it? Yeah, there's lots of issues with all of it. But that doesn't mean we get to throw the whole thing out. That doesn't mean we can say, there's a lot of problems with the Second Amendment, so guess what? We're going to get rid of it. Because there's a metaphor in there that is true, because guess what? Governments do become tyrannical. And guess what? People do need to be able to defend themselves. And governments probably should be a little bit afraid of the citizens. And government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. That's how things should be. And people in government should only make decisions according to the consent of the governed. Like, these are concepts that we have in America that don't exist in most places in the world. But we risk, if we throw out these ideas that we don't like, or they're not quite true, or they're maybe tinged with racism, or they come from a mentality of people who supported slavery, and then we throw the baby out with the bathwater. We throw the metaphor away with the facts. And that's my vision of finding Fuscata. We have to find those things. And the word Fuscata reminds me all the time. Every time I say it, I think, don't fall for the dogma. Help people see past the dogma. Help people see that when they buy in 100% into this idea of the 100th monkey principle, they're buying into something that is factually false, but metaphorically true. And it's so important to point that out. And to tell you, like, hey, this story of Jesus, the story of the resurrection, it's most likely factually false. There's very little evidence that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Very little evidence. There's circumstantial evidence. There's loads and loads and loads of circumstantial evidence. But there's no physical evidence. There's nobody who ever wrote down and said, I saw Jesus walk out of the tomb. There were, folks who were there and told the story, but there's different kinds of stories, and there's different numbers of angels, and there's different, nobody has the same story and said, this is definitely what happened. So we can't know. But is the metaphor important? The metaphor is critically important. On levels that we can't conceive of. The idea that Jesus rose from the dead is incredibly important. So, my endeavor then is to look at these things objectively and help you look at them objectively and find out what those important truths are, so that we together, as Americans and as Brits and Aussies and, I don't know, pick a nation, doesn't matter, as human citizens of this planet, in our own respective nations, in our own respective cultures, from our own respective languages, can find those things that are universally true. And I don't want to start a new religion. I'm not trying to seek a new church, but even if you can look at things in your own religion, your own culture, and instead of saying, that's stupid, Buddha probably never existed, Krishna wasn't a real human being, I don't know. I don't know. But the thing is sometimes that doesn't matter. Think about this. There's a very real sense in which Romeo and Juliet are more real than I am. Romeo and Juliet, that came out of William Shakespeare's brain. And he wrote it down on a paper, and he said, there's this boy and this girl, and these two families, and they were fighting, and they fell in love, and blah, blah, blah. And then, she poisoned herself, and then he stabbed himself, and it was just tragic. Right. And we all know that that's fiction. That didn't happen. There may have been something similar to it that actually happened that inspired him to write the story. I don't know. But we understand that, we accept that as fiction. But simultaneously, does anybody remember William Shakespeare's cousins? Does anybody remember who the second king of France was? Does anybody remember the guy that sold William Shakespeare his shoes? Some of these people you can look up. They're historical documents, they're historical records, and we can say, oh yeah, King so-and-so was here, and the 13th emperor of China was this guy, and there are people who are there in history. But for all the people who are there and documented in history, there are millions upon millions of people who aren't documented. And nobody studied their lives. Nobody studied the metaphors of their lives. Nobody studied their romantic encounters. Like, nobody studied any of that stuff. But people have studied for hundreds of years the story of Romeo and Juliet. What does it mean? What are the metaphors? How did they speak? What did they look like? What did they do? How can we interpret those stories into our own modern lives? Like, what does all this stuff mean? And so there's a very real sense, because it stays in the zeitgeist, that those two characters, Romeo and Juliet, are very much more real than you and I. 100 years from now, nobody's going to know who I was. And that's just the cold hard truth. Maybe 50, maybe 60 years from now, nobody. There's gonna be like a couple of people that are like, oh, wasn't there that dude, like that Shawn dude? And he had like a thing. He had some kids. I don't know. I don't remember. It's gonna be gone. Gone. Because sometimes the metaphor is more important than the reality. The metaphor of Romeo and Juliet is more important than the people who actually were Romeo and Juliet. Because that's the true thing. And so, as you're listening to Finding Fuscata, as you are going on this journey with me, when you listen to these interviews and when I unpack these ideas and you look at these things, I want you to be thinking about that. I want that like in the back of your head. We're thinking about the metaphor. Think about the part of the thing that we're talking about that is actually true. The thing that will last. A Course in Miracles says that nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists. And this is the kicker. And herein lies the peace of God. And what this is saying is that, like in your life, think back to your earliest childhood memory, and then think about what you had for breakfast this morning, or whatever it was that was happening when you woke up this morning, and then think about your greatest plans for the future. That conceptualization of yourself, that thing that remembered your earliest childhood memories and what you did today, and what you're doing here in this moment, and what you're projecting out into the future. That's the part of you that's real. This body is just borrowed soil. It changes and grows and comes in and goes out, and I'm losing millions and millions of skin cells every day, and my hair is falling out and new ones are coming in, and I'm literally not in the same body that I was in this morning when I woke up just a few hours ago. My body is changing that quickly. So in that sense, this isn't what's real. This shirt came from, there was some cotton, and then there was some fossil fuels, and somebody made some plastics, and somebody picked the cotton and they blended them together and knitted them into this shirt. A few years ago, none of this existed in the world like it is right now. And several years in the future, none of this will exist again. So what this is saying is only that which is real. Right? It says nothing unreal exists. Nothing real can be threatened, and nothing unreal exists. This is just an illusion of me. This body is an illusion of me. It's important to me because it carries me around. I want to preserve it. If I smack it, it hurts. If I cut it, it bleeds. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to preserve this body as long as I can. But not because it's the real thing. But instead, it's because it's the way that I interact with the world. It's the way that I learn lessons. It's the way that I experience pleasures. It's the way that I experience disappointments. And in the same sense, the things that are true, the metaphors behind the stories, those are the things that last. The way that a young boy will fall in love with a young girl, that's true. The way that two families can have strife between them and they don't know how they're going to resolve it, that's true. The story of Jacob and Esau in the Old Testament and how there was that conflict between them for so many years. And you can feel that tension. That's real. And then they came together and they reunited in brotherly love, and they wept because they hadn't seen each other, and there'd been all that tension, and then there was forgiveness and there was reconciliation. That's true. The reconciliation is true. Forgiveness is true. Love is true. It's ironic that, it seems ironic, but it's not, that the things that are true are the things that we don't really, we can't touch them. Because those are the things that last. Those are the things that are there in every generation. They're there in every culture, in every people. And that is what Finding Fuscata is about. So anyway, join me on this journey. Join me on this journey. If you listen this long, then thank you. I'm humbled and thankful. I don't know if you have noticed, but I made 100 subscribers, which seems like not much, but I'm so thankful for those 100 subscribers. It's amazing. Like 100 people have been like, oh yeah, I'll listen to that, see what this guy has to say. It's fantastic. Anyway, I hope you're doing well. I hope you are finding peace and happiness and joy in your life today. I hope that you are seeking in everything that you do to make the world just a little bit better than how you found it. And that you are seeking after higher ideals. That you're not trapped in this world of limitations and grief and blame. But that you're looking inside and you're finding better things within yourself, and you're seeking to take those better things and bring them out into the world. I really hope that you're doing that. It's a good way to live life. But anyway, on that note, I am out of here, and see me soon. Bye.
Yeah, I know my dad's annoying.